So once again, the United States is using its typical justifications of exporting democracy, accusing foreign leaders of being terrorists or drug traffickers in order to destabilize that nation so it can gain control after invading the nation, so that way it can do what it always does best, which is gain and take access of other countries' resources. And today we're going to break down my viewpoint on exactly why I feel that the entire invasion of Venezuela and soon to be Nigeria, and I even predict a place like Brazil, is all about resources, and it has nothing to do, maybe it does, maybe it doesn't have something to do with drug trafficking, and maybe Nigeria's has nothing to do with the Christian genocide. I'm Austin Holloman. We're going to break it down today. Make sure you like and subscribe. Now, the central argument of this video is going to be quite simple. The United States is not primarily targeting Venezuela because of drugs or democracy, as it always has said for over a century now, but the United States is using drug cartel accusations and democratic rhetoric as calling Nicolas Maduro a dictator, which I'm not saying he is or he isn't, but this is just a similar playbook that we've always seen, to gain control over its oil reserves and keep the United States sphere of influence in its favor. Now, why was Nicolas Maduro a target in the first place? In March 2020, the United States Department of Justice formally indicted Nicolas Maduro, and he was accused of narco-terrorism, drug trafficking, and conspiring with Colombia's FARC rebels to intentionally flood the United States with cocaine, especially laced with fentanyl, which has killed millions of Americans in the past years. The United States framed Maduro as a criminal kingpin and not just a political enemy that they don't like. This is extremely rare because the United States almost never indicts sitting heads of other states. The last comparable case was Manuel Noriega of Panama, who was later invaded and captured in a very similar manner. So one claim that U.S. officials have made about Venezuelan military elites is that they are running a drug network called the Cartel of the Suns. And this narrative began after Venezuela expelled the DEA in 2005, and Venezuela became a transit route for cocaine moving from Colombia into the United States. However, cocaine production happens in Colombia and in Peru as well, but Venezuela is primarily a pass-through route and not a production center. And even U.S. intelligence later admitted that there is no hard evidence that Maduro personally controls these drug cartels or any of their activities, and this undermines the claim that the charges are purely law enforcement driven. Now, the timing of this makes this all very suspicious, in my opinion. The indictment happened during the peak U.S. sanctions on Venezuelan oil. Venezuela's oil production collapsed at this time as well, and the global oil market chaos was also happening all at the same time. At the time of the indictment, Venezuelan oil output had fallen from over 3 million barrels per day to just under 700,000. And of course, this is when Venezuela was economically cornered, and like the United States and many other Western nations have always done, is apply sanctions to add more pressure. And since that doesn't work, what they'll do is they will actually criminalize the head of the state, like you see in places like Iran. Now, the biggest reality of this is that Venezuela has the largest proven oil reserves on earth, which is larger than Saudi Arabia, and oil is Venezuela's economic lifeline, which actually made it one of the richest countries in Latin America earlier in the 1900s. So the first step in modern day and age is to hit countries with economic sanctions rather than invade them like they would have done maybe in World War II or previous times. So these sanctions were put on Venezuela to cut off their oil revenue and collapse their government financially and cause a certain amount of unrest within the country to force a regime change. And this is something that is happening in Iran, where the countries are suffering so much from hyperinflation, or even in Venezuela, people had growth stunts. A large number of people were being underfed due to sanctions, to the point where this unrest caused them to rise up and do their own coup without the United States actually having to go and invade or infiltrate. And U.S. officials weren't even subtle about these sanctions. John Bolton openly said that U.S. oil companies would benefit from a post-Maduro Venezuela. In other words, if we overthrow this guy, our oil companies will always win. Corporate America actually has their own militaries, not literally, but they have so much influence that they can actually get the United States to be on their side so they can make more money. This is how things have always happened for the United States. So remember, as I said before, in March 2020, Maduro was actually indicted at that time during COVID. Now, this didn't matter about the U.S. gas prices because at that time, I can personally remember in Texas, gas got down to about $1 per gallon. So gas was as low as it had been for a long time, which means that there was no fuel emergency and that this objective was more of a long-term control over Venezuela rather than a short-term relief. Now, of course, in response to all this, Maduro is going to deny all these allegations. He's going to call this indictment an imperialist attack and a judicial coup and a pretext to justify an invasion of his country. And his government even argued that the U.S. was criminalizing leadership to justify regime change. And whether if you like it or not, the strategy itself is very visible. So I'm going to give you guys some pretext on when this has actually happened in the United States, because even our 50th state of Hawaii was acquired in this exact same way. And I'm not saying that this is going to happen with Venezuela, but this will be the same playbook that happened in 1893 if it did. So if you guys know the U.S. businessman Sanford Dole, who owns the Dole Pineapple Company, he was operating in Hawaii at a time. All of his business was there. And of course, countries don't want to be colonized economically by other countries. So they'll say, oh, like, you know, we have all these American businessmen here in Hawaii, and they're taking all our jobs and they're exploiting our people. So, of course, they had a queen that wanted to push back, and she wanted to get control back over Hawaii and push the U.S. companies out. So, of course, what these businessmen said to the United States government was they could justify overthrowing this new monarchy because of stability and protection of American interests. And the reality was it was just more so about having control over that trade in that country, in that region, or just in general, and protecting the profits that they made off the sugar plantations that they had in Hawaii. And so the United States jumped on board, and they allowed Sanford Dole to basically bring in soldiers for hire, mercenaries, former U.S. soldiers, go in and overthrow the queen and put her on house arrest. And then soon after that, Hawaii was annexed into the 51st state, and now they have complete control. And you've even seen now in Hawaii, they're trying to get rid of the locals, how they burn down all those houses in the only in the poor area. And also the fire trucks didn't have any sirens, and they didn't have any fire hydrants. They didn't have any way to fix those fires. So that was all planned, in my opinion. And this is just a playbook of how those things happen. The United States also caused a regime change to protect financial interests of its own back in the day in Guatemala. If you guys don't know about the United Fruit Company in 1954, they overthrew Guatemala's elected president because he was being accused of being a communism. And this goes back to what I said before of exporting democracy. Oh, you're not a capitalist, you're a socialist, or you want to do communism. Okay, well, they're going to write and justify all throughout the country that, hey, these people over here, right here in our backyard in Guatemala, are becoming communists, and it's going to threaten American interests in our lives, and they might put nuclear missiles here. And that is a just enough reason to invade that country. So that was what they ran, which was, oh, it's communism. But in reality, their profits were being affected because the new leader that they had at the time had the same thing that the Hawaiian queen wanted, which was, hey, these Americans are here exploiting our people, and they're taking all the profits, and we're not getting anything from it. We need to get our land back, literally. And if you guys don't know, the United Fruit Company, the people that worked for those fruit companies from Guatemala, they didn't pay them in dollars. They didn't pay them in their pesos or whatever currency that they have there. They paid them in United Fruit Company vouchers, meaning that they could only spend their paycheck at work. That is the highest form of exploitation, because that means you can't even pay rent based off what you did at work. So maybe they had to live at work. I don't know, but they were in complete control. And their new leader that was a supposed communist, and it could have been communist. I mean, they wanted to basically nationalize those industries so they can take control back their land and their people. But again, the CIA has always intervened, and they destroyed a democracy to protect a corporation's financial interests. And to this day, this created decades of instability, just like throughout the rest of Latin America. And now you're just seeing another playbook here in Venezuela. And if you guys don't know, recently in Syria and Iraq, both of these places were accused of weapons of mass destruction or abuse of human rights, or they needed democracy exported, or they had some sort of narco terrorism, or just plain flat out Islamic terrorism, which I'm not saying those things aren't true, but these things were used to justify an invasion to go kill millions of people that really had nothing to do with it, as you guys know happened in Iraq. And it just so happened that those places all had oil as well. And then lastly, you can see to this day, just recently last week, Donald Trump called a bombing in Nigeria. And they've been flying surveillance drones over Nigeria to map out how they're going to stop the Christian genocide. Something that's been going on in Western Africa and the Sahel for a long time. And, you know, usually the United States is kind of like, oh, oh, they got there's Islamic terrorists over there. I was like, oh, okay. And then they find oil. Oh shit, we need to save our allies. This is a crusade. We need to help them all of a sudden because they find oil. And this is a repeated pattern that you see throughout invasions around the world that the United States has. It's either exporting democracy or there's some sort of resource that they need that country has. And even back then, when the United States military had a heavier presence in Syria, I even remember seeing a clip of Donald Trump saying that he would bring it in and he would take the oil. He literally just said that exact same thing about Venezuela, that yes, okay, we got rid of this drug trafficker and now we're going to start pulling that oil back to our country. Basically, we're stealing your stuff, something that we all know has been happening for a long time. Now, what does this mean for the future of Venezuela? Venezuela is not being treated as a country anymore. It's being treated as a resource zone. The drug narrative criminalizes leadership, justifies sanctions, and prepares public opinion for escalation. And the democracy narrative provides moral legitimacy and appeals to Western audiences. And the oil is the constant variable that you see in all these scenarios that I just brought up. Now, I know that there are a lot of Venezuelans all over the world that are happy that Maduro is going to be facing, him and his wife are going to be facing charges in the United States. And yes, that's why I said before, I'm not saying that he wasn't a dictator. I'm not saying that he didn't do horrible things to people, because all leaders have done horrible things to people. There's been a lot of human rights abuses in each and every country. And I'm saying that I don't really think that the United States actually gives a damn about those people suffering, because they allow those things to go on for a long period of time until they find out that they have some sort of financial motive. If terrorism and gangs and drugs and all those bad democracy and all those type of things are huge problems, and we have the world police entitlement to go around and save people around the world, why have they not fixed Haiti? You know, why has Haiti been the same way it's been? Why have all these countries that have been in a state of suffering for decades been allowed to do so? Until they find something that they seriously need in those countries and they can exploit it to a further amount, that's when they come to save. And lastly, I would love to know what you guys think. I mean, I know that Iran is about to have the same thing happen to them right now. Donald Trump just recently put out a tweet talking about how the people in Iran are protesting and they want to overthrow their government now, and that's getting really strong. It seems like in a couple of days or maybe a few weeks that might be happening as well. And Donald Trump just recently said if those people need help, the United States will come to their rescue. What else does Iran have? They also have oil. And Iran actually used to be an ally of the United States before the Islamic caliphate that they have now. And if you look at photos from Iran from the 1950s and 40s, they just look like a bunch of Middle Eastern people or Iranian people living somewhere in Colorado or California, because they were that westernized from the jump, because the United States had a puppet leader there, which caused them to have the current leader that was overthrown. So that Iran is on the same path to going back to where it was at before, in my opinion. And I think that this will be reenacted in another place like Mexico and Brazil. And if you guys don't know, recently the United States labeled the Mexican drug cartels as terrorists, no longer just criminals in Mexico. They're terrorists, which allows the United States the right, apparently, to invade Mexico and take care of it the same way they did in Afghanistan, Pakistan, Iraq, and Syria. If there's terrorists there, the world police now has the authority to go over and do something about it. And so you might see what happened in Venezuela happen in the United States. Donald Trump is already, the United States is already accused, and this is kind of true too, but they've already accused the Mexican government of being involved in drug trafficking in their country. And so this could happen in Mexico. President Lula of Brazil is the complete opposite of Trump. The one before him, Bolsonaro, was actually the Trump of the tropics is what they called him. He was basically Donald Trump of Brazil. Same type of, they stole the election. Same thing happened. Everything. Went to jail, except Bolsonaro was facing a 27 or a 29-year prison sentence. But in fact, his president before that, so it was Lula, Bolsonaro, and then Lula again. Lula got caught up in a car wash scandal for drug trafficking in Brazil. And then Bolsonaro comes about, and then Lula is back in power. And so Donald Trump can actually use this exact same thing, like, hey, this left-leaning socialist type president in Brazil that's right in our backyard is a drug trafficker. He can use the same narrative and then do a similar, I don't think he'll invade Brazil, but he can do something very similar. The thing is, a lot of these countries are afraid of a U.S. invasion. So the same way how you saw how they just pretty much handed over Maduro, you could see that stuff happen all throughout Latin America again. And unfortunately, if a lot of these countries do not comply with U.S. policies, they will fall victim to the same thing. Let me know what you guys think. So far, I'll give another update whenever they come to his actual sentencing of him and his wife, but we do know that they are being indicted on drug trafficking in Venezuela. And if you enjoyed that video and you want more content like this and you want to be the first to get it before it comes to YouTube, and you want written stories in your email every week, click the link in the first pinned comment and sign up for our email list, and you'll be well informed on all geopolitics all throughout Africa, South America, and every continent in the world. I'll see you guys next time.